So welcome. This is the inaugural event of the very first Health and Care Analytics Conference ever. So we're all very excited. We do, of course, have a face-to-face conference next week. There are still virtual places available if you're interested in that. Do go on the website. But today we have a very special guest with us, who Mohammed will do a better job of introducing than I will, but he's come to talk to us about SIPmath. It's Brian Putt. So could I have the next slide, please, for a couple of bit of housekeeping? So this is obviously a webinar, so could you please keep your mic muted, otherwise we'll be able to hear you. Do introduce yourselves in the chat box, please, and you can certainly use the chat box function to ask questions, and if there's any problems with the stream or anything, then please highlight them. Brian, I believe, is keen to have a reasonably interactive session. There will be interactivity in the session, so do feel free to pop anything you like in the chat. We have people here who will be monitoring it, so we'll keep on top of all that. The session is being recorded and it will be on the website, so you'll be able to catch up with it later. Do tweet about the event today, please, using the hashtag we've been using throughout and we'll be using next week at the face-to-face conference, which is hashtag HACA2023. You can follow us on Twitter at the HACA conference, and also the strategy unit, which is the people who are organizing the conference, including myself. And a very important part of this bit is also going to be the Menti. I believe that will be mentioned again later on. But that is the link for you just now, but I'm sure they will come back later. So I'd like to welcome you all to the first event. Thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Brian very much for kicking us off. I'm sure it'll be a great time, and I'll now hand over to Mohammed.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm also helping Chris with the HACA conference, and it's a real pleasure and an honor, really, to introduce the first event and the first speaker. So if I could go to Brian's slide, please. Thank you. So today's speaker is Brian Putt. Brian Putt is on the board of directors at the time of this biography. He's acting chair of the SDP San Francisco Bay Area chapter and sits on the SDP certification committee. He's a fellow in the Society of Decision Professionals. He donates a huge amount of his time to educational activities for nonprofits, and he promotes the arithmetic of uncertainty. Brian has used simulations for decision-making for the past 10 years, developing techniques that leverage the capabilities of simulation over decision trees and advancing Excel modeling techniques for simulation. He consults on decision quality and decision analysis and uncertainty. He has a YouTube channel, which is very popular, and he has many videos which are well worth looking at. I should also point out that I reached out to Brian separately, and we've had many conversations which have been really enjoyable and informative. I'm not quite sure what time zone in the States Brian is in today, but if you could let us know also which part of the States is in, I think we'll be interested in that. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Brian, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Yeah, I'm actually retired in June from the board of directors. I wanted to leave some more spots for some new blood to come in. I've been on the board for 4 years. I was honored at the last SDP conference by receiving the Pioneering Award. And this is actually a very prestigious award. There's only 10 other people that have received it over the lifetime of SDP, and some very well-known people in the decision analysis space. So we've already mentioned certification, and I would encourage you to think about certification in SDP. If you're interested, you can reach me at on my email, which you'll be seeing here momentarily. In fact, it's probably there now. No, I'm not sure it's there right now, but in any case, no problem in getting that. So I'm in Ennis, Montana. Ennis, Montana is a small town of 900 people as of the 2020 census. And on the 4th of July, which the U.S. celebrates, they have a parade, and there were 20,000 people here to watch the parade. So it's really a massive event. So a very interesting time to be here in Ennis. This is where my daughter has a summer home. All right, where do we go from here?
So Brian, you start sharing your screen, please.
Okay.
You can start picking up. Thank you. Okay. By the way, feel free to put questions in the chat, folks. And we're planning a break on the hour, so there'll be a 5-minute comfort break at 4 o'clock. Thank you, Brian. Over to you.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about decision analysis and decision quality. And this, there's always decisions to be made, whether it be in your personal life or in the business life, in the healthcare industry. And it's good to have a process for making those kinds of decisions. And we'll be talking about there are different types of decisions to make. And then we want to talk about value measures and how getting the value measures right is important. And then providing the right insights to the decision makers, because oftentimes these decision makers have a preconceived answer of what we should be doing. And it's great if your analysis comes up and says that's the right answer, but sometimes it doesn't. And you need to have good presentation techniques for making the case. And I want to say telling the story, okay? Telling the story is really important. And so I'm going to be showing some of that. We're going to actually be doing we're going to talk about some PowerPoint slides, and then I think roughly about the break, not necessarily right then, we're going to flip over to a live Excel model. I'm going to show you how easy it is to do this probabilistic analysis. You've been told to be muted. You're going to review the questions. We'll answer some questions, right away. Mohammed's going to interrupt me. Things that don't get answered and require an answer, I'll put those and give those to Mohammed. He can distribute those. And I think you already have a copy of the presentation, or will be receiving one. It's being recorded. So from Wikipedia, let's see, we got people in the waiting room, by the way. Let's see, I'm going to close that off. I don't think that does anything. It's a discipline comprising the philosophy and theory of methodology. This is something that's been around since the 70s, would you believe? 70s. But that's 50 years. And strangely enough, it hasn't really caught on when you think about all the other things that have caught on in the business world. But it's really an important practice. And associated with that is something called decision quality, which is talking about a little bit softer version, talking about framing and that sort of thing. But we're going to talk about that aspect of it, and we're going to do a decision analysis. We're going to talk about the whole thing and the whole process and give you some simple examples. So I'm not going to play this video, but I wanted to share it with you so you knew it and had the link to it. George Kirkland was vice chairman of Chevron, and we went, some of you are probably familiar with Informs. If not, an organization you might want to look up as well, very large organization. But Chevron won an award for Informs for their decision analysis practice. And we asked George to generate this video for us. It lasts 3 minutes, but it took an hour to record. I mean, I swear, he did it over and over and over again to get it just right. And we did win. But it's a very interesting video that talks about how decision analysis was part of, quote, Chevron's DNA. And it talks about the Gorgon LNG project on the other side of the world from where you are. But of course, LNG is very important to Europe right now. So I think you would enjoy watching that video. So then we have some participant questions, and I think the Menti link is being put in the chat now. Can I admit people? Okay, I'm going to admit people. Rachel, do we have people doing the Menti thing now? Should I carry on?
Yeah, so I've put the Menti link in the chat. So if people would be just kind enough to click on the Menti link, it should take you directly to the Menti, and I could, when there's a few people there, I can see 1 or 2 people arriving. I could share my screen.
Okay.
Shall I do that now, and we can see what people?
And why don't you let me talk about this one slide while they do that.
Okay, let's do that.
Then we'll bring up the results of the Menti.
Okay.
So I was just reading. This is 5 July. So this is yesterday's Wall Street Journal, and they're talking about this health facility that's actually in California. And I guess during the crisis, they were paying $200 an hour for nurses, which, that's a pretty big number for nurses. And now they're having trouble financially. and the lenders are demanding that they hire consultants and figure out where the money's going to come from to pay the interest, to repay the loans, and so forth and so on. So I think this is an example where they made a decision without really thinking through the whole process and all the value measures that are important. And certainly the health care is important, but also they need to be financially healthy to carry on as an organization. So I think making good decisions and understanding what you're really trying to do is important in all industries and in your personal life. Okay, how are we doing on the Menti thing? You got enough to report now? If I stop sharing, you can take it away from me, I think.
Well, I'm just waiting for people to respond now, which they are now. If I just share my screen and then we can see what people are.
So I've submitted my Menti response.
What did you say, Mohammed?
I'm not telling, but there you go.
So there you go. So I think we've picked the right audience, Brian. So most people are saying none in terms of their experience.
I had a question from Europe this morning about a stratified sample. I think this is probably a stratified sample of 50 or 60 people. So it's probably pretty good. All right. Well, I think I think the presentation is geared appropriately for the distribution shown here of no experience with Monte Carlo.
Shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, sure, certainly.
Okay. There's just 2 more questions.
I'll be surprised if there's many yeses here. Oh, wow. Okay, what this is telling me is that, yes, they're familiar with decision quality or decision analysis, and the ones that have said yes are probably doing it with a decision tree sort of thing. That's been the classical way of doing it. But I see decision spelled wrong. The computers have advanced significantly in the last 25 years, the speed of them. And now doing Monte Carlo is much easier to do, and it's much more flexible in how you do things. And you can consider more uncertainties than you can a decision tree. So, and really, if you talk to a lot of the consultants, they're going that way with the Monte Carlo now. Let me go on to the next question here. Do you consider uncertainty in your decision making? Oh, this would be interesting. No responses yet. Oh, why is that? Oh, there we go. Sometimes, okay. I see we have some decisions are not quantifiable. There's books about how you can quantify anything by Doug Hubbard. So sometimes, and sometimes it's an all right answer. I think it's you have to understand the importance of that. And I actually have a slide that's going to be coming up here, and we can talk briefly about that. And all the time other than trivial decisions. And 8 is no, we don't. Okay. And the no's are the ones we really need to get in. We need to move those people in the no towards the right here on this distribution, okay? Okay, I think, is that the last question there, or is there one more? Is that the last question, Rachel?
It's the last one for now.
Okay, all right, very good. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll share my screen here, and we'll come back here now. Let's see. Whoop. All right. So probabilistic analysis and decision making. Sam Savage is a professor at Stanford University and the executive director of probability management, who developed SIPmath, which is what I'll be showing you a little bit later here in Excel. But basically what he is saying is, look, if you do deterministic stuff, it's going to be wrong. So this little cartoon here is showing this man who knows the depth of the river is only 5 feet and says, I can walk that. The problem is he didn't understand that there's this deep hole. So most of the river is maybe a foot and a half, but this one deep hole has increased the average to 3 feet. Scenario planning is something that some companies are still practicing, and it's really, in my opinion, very poor practice. In their videos to talk about scenario planning and why it's not good, because they don't show you the shape of the value measure necessarily, and then there's no probabilities oftentimes associated with the scenario planning. So, and there's probably some hybrids in there that could be done, but certainly scenario planning does kind of extend the frame that you might be looking at. So what we're going to be talking about is decision quality tools and simulation that provides insights about opportunities to make better decisions. Now, I wanted to bring in another hospital reference here, and this is Kaiser Permanente. Most of you probably heard of it. I think it's pretty big here in the States. I'm not sure that's over in Europe at all. But they're using something called the FAIR model, which is really predicated on SIPmath, okay? It doesn't advertise it that way, but that's the background of it. And they've applied it to the enterprise service model, the IT return on investment, and cyber insurance. I'm not going to go through these slides, but the concept is they've developed influence diagrams that talked about the annual loss exposure, and then that's broken into the loss event frequency times the magnitude. And so you multiply those two things together, and you get the loss exposure. So, and this is a binomial distribution with multiple events, and this is typically a log normal type thing, or something that looks like log normal, okay? And then they did it for the annual revenue, and they got the revenue loss and the productivity impact, and you broke it down into these different things. You can study these later on, okay? And then they have the IT return on investment. So you have different capital projects. So this might be for your organization. Hey, I need to add more beds. Do I add a whole new facility? Do I extend a facility? All kinds of different ways. Do I maybe put it in a different location? Some adjacent property if there's no way to expand. There's all these different options that you want to consider. And so you can look at the net present value of the project. There may be other value measures you want to look at. I promote the use of profitability index, PI, and you can look that up on Wikipedia. And at least a lot of oil companies are using that. And it's related to the NPV divided by the capital investment, although I discount the capital investment. Any case, and then there's cyber insurance, and of course, the medical industry has a lot of confidential information, private information that has to be kept that way. And so you're always concerned about people infiltrating your system, your computer system. And so cyber insurance and the security is important. And what you really want to look at in these cases is not just looking at what is my risk, you really want to evaluate different mitigation policies. In other words, mitigation could be, I'm going to take this data and put it across multiple servers, just that if they get into one server, they don't get it all, they only get a piece of it. Anyway, you'd look at that because typically you have a capital fund for this, your IT department to mitigate risk, or have cyber insurance, I guess. And they have to figure out how to allocate that. So what Kaiser did, these are all Kaiser slides, by the way. They had I think they've been filtered here, but they had, this is the calculated risk they had in their portfolio. And the objective was to get down to here. So they wanted to mitigate this gap. And they did that through looking at different alternatives. All right. So let's come back to what is decision analysis. It's a systematic process. And this this diagram from SDG, and SDG is a consulting firm here in California, Northern California. And it's been around since the 80s, and it hasn't really changed too much. Sometimes you'll see a little bit different titles here, but there's these 6 spokes, and it starts down here with an appropriate frame. I need to hide my floating controls. There we go. So you've got this appropriate frame down here, which is really important. You have creative alternatives, and then meaningful information. And meaningful doesn't mean all information. It means meaningful information. What's important to this particular decision? And I've already highlighted the clear values and trade-offs here, but that's really important. Remember that little hospital example I gave earlier on from the Wall Street Journal. And then there's logical reasoning. How does a model fit together? Are you really thinking about it correctly? And then really important is the commitment to action, because I know I have been in meetings where, I've talked to a president or vice president, gave a nice presentation, thank you very much, Brian, so forth and so on. And that's the last I ever heard of it. Nothing ever came from that presentation. So there was no commitment to action on what I gave them. So you need to be thinking about these elements when you make a decision. And these spider diagrams are telling you, and this might be the consensus of the project team. Okay, we've got a lot of creative alternatives, but the frame is not right. We're not looking at the right problem. And this appropriate frame also has to be appropriate to the decision makers, the decision board. So let's move on here. Okay, guess I need to click in here first. So typically the dialogue process is the situations recognized by the decision board and the decision executive. They form a team, they do some framing, they come back and approve it. So they're making sure they're working on the right problem. You develop some alternatives, they agree that these are the right alternatives, because you do not want to leave out the alternative that those decision makers are thinking about. I got to this location over the last 20 years because I made really good decisions. I've got a really good gut feeling for all that stuff. So I think I know what the answer is. You better make sure that their alternative is considered in the analysis. It doesn't have to be the one you recommend, but it just needs to be considered. And then there's the making the decision and approving the plan. And I must admit that the frame and the alternatives are often done about the same time. But this diagram was written up separately. Now, Chevron had something called the eagle's beak. And you can see that this is the eagle's, here's the beak of the eagle. And what we're saying here is that the framing of the problem is really most important. Because if I don't frame it properly, I can get down here, and then no matter how good the project execution, I can't get to a good outcome. Even if I get the right frame and the right project selection, a poor execution will get me up in here. So getting the right problem and getting the right strategy, decision policy is really very important. And these are the different phases of the project down here. I guess opportunity identified, generating alternatives. You can see developing a preferred alternative. You can see it's got the largest value, adds the greatest value to the slope here. All right. All right. So we want to be up on the top part of the curve. Now, when we took that survey, some of you said some of the time when it's really important, and others said all the time, and some did none. Well, this came from Annie Duke. And Annie Duke, her book, How to Decide, Annie Duke was actually a poker player. And in playing poker, you have to make decisions really fast, and you have to know, have to be willing to do that and understand. Maybe understand how big is the pot, or how much you're betting, or how much you have to stay, how much money you have to contribute to stay in the game. So you can follow through this. Would any of these alternatives be acceptable? And if yes, yeah, just go ahead and make a decision. You don't have to do a lot of analysis. You shouldn't think of decision analysis and decision quality as a long drawn out thing. This could be just a one-day effort, okay? And so you can work through this. The space that I worked at in Chevron was mostly down here. Can the decision have multiple steps, incremental investments? Yes. Do a lower impact decision first. And no, slow down, okay? And then are they revocable? So this revocable, most of the decisions in the oil industry are not revocable in the capital space. All right. Okay, now we're coming up to our next survey here. We got an ABC company, makes widgets that cost $30 and they're sold for $40. And they recently completed a market survey that suggested the demand, or the average demand, is 100,000 units. And we are tasked with putting in an order for the widgets materials. So how many widgets would you order to maximize the profit? So you're being asked to make an estimate here. And I think a Minty link is being put in the chat for you to put in your current estimate of what you want to order. And later on in this presentation, we're going to be using that, and we're actually going to set that to a distribution, your actual inputs. I don't know if I open up the chat, whether I get to see everything or not.
So people are responding to the challenge, Brian.
Got it. All right.
So we can either share the information now as people respond, or we can do that later.
We're gonna do that later. I think you're gonna take those responses and send them to me.
Yep. Yes, I am.
And we'll see what this looks like.
Is there a minimum number of responses that this will work for? We've got about 20 so far.
Oh, that's good. That's fine. We can probably leave that open while we. When I go on, that doesn't impact.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. Okay. But we're not going to open up Google form. We're not going to do that. Okay. So, as you thought about this problem, you may have had some motivational biases or cognitive biases. Motivational be, hey, I want to have the maximum profit here. Or there may be something cognitive that, from recent examples, maybe you've done something where you've tried to sell something and you've got some bad outcomes there, and you've learned from that. And so these cognitive biases, oftentimes I talk about earthquakes because I live in California. And, if you just had an earthquake, you ask the person, what's the chance we're going to have an earthquake? And it's a lot higher than if it had been several years since you'd had an earthquake. So that's a cognitive bias. It's not motivational. Motivational is often talked about in terms of sales objectives. I want to be the top dog, or I always want to exceed my projection. Those are motivational biases. And really what you're trying to do is get rid of these biases when you get estimates for things, if you don't have historical data. If you have historical data, then we want to use that. That's better. But sometimes you don't. You have to go to a subject matter expert, and you want to debias them when they give you these estimates. So the cognitive biases are rules of thumb. All right. Issue raising. So how do you go about this decision quality? We need to do this framing exercise. Remember, that was the first spoke of the decision quality wheel. And the way you really want to do it and the way we did it at Chevron was we brought together subject matter experts in all the different disciplines, okay? So you may have people in operations, you may have people in the capital area, you may have people in the finance area, you may have people in the legal area that join. And you talk about what are the issues relative to our objective of this problem, this opportunity, this investment, or this whatever the decision might be. And yeah, I guess you first had to decide what is the decision. And they start throwing out stuff, and you can use sticky notes. And there's all this electronic stuff you can use, little sticky programs. Google has one that you can use, I've often used. And you have different pages depending upon the discipline. And people put all these stickies. And so then you sort those things into the decisions that are identified. And sometimes you have to go through each one of these and make sure they're worded properly. Do you agree that this is a decision as opposed to an uncertainty? And then the uncertainties that you have, things you don't control. These are things you do control. And then there are the value measures. And so we've already mentioned NPV. There's a capital efficiency, which I think is profitability index, PI. And then in your case, you may have level of service. And then there may be some other factors like the contractor to build the facility. Now we want to capture all these different issues, because then we're going to put them into a decision hierarchy. And so I've tried to take this decision hierarchy and put it in terms of like more what I think your medical decision is, which is maybe adding beds for your facility. So here, this was a given that the existing facilities are at capacity. That's going to be a given, and the decision board needs to confirm that that's a given they want to make. And maybe they don't agree with that. And should we add a new facility would be a focused on decision. What practices would be covered? In other words, is this going to be a walk-in place? Are we going to do ICUs there? And then what equipment is needed? And are we going to have to add employees to do this? Nurses and doctors. And then the tactical decision is the contractor to build the facility. All right. So once I've taken this decision hierarchy, I'm now going to take these things and I put them into what I call a strategy table, or what is called a strategy table. And this can be oriented this direction or the other direction. I find that if you do this properly, you end up with a lot of decisions to go into this. So should we add a facility, yes or no? What practices will be covered? X-rays, the CT scans, MRIs, and the number of beds. And we're not trying to, this is reading across this way. And I'm not sure practices would be, I guess the number of beds could be a separate decision, depending upon what I'm going to be doing here. What equipment is needed? None. Just relocate the existing equipment. We're kind of crowded into our existing facilities. Need some, or no, we're going to need everything that goes in this new facility, whether an expansion of existing or a whole new building. And how many new employees? I'm just trying to give you some examples. Nothing scientific about this at all. But I find the strategy table being the most important thing you can do in the framing exercise, because it really brings home what are the decisions. Because if you can't identify these alternatives, it's probably not a decision. So I really want to push this as a activity you try to do. And remember, all of these things I'm doing, I remember we did one for an LNG project, and we had 3 large companies in there. And we spent 2 days going through this whole thing. And it really framed the whole problem, and everyone kind of got on the same page. But that was a really big problem. Sometimes this whole thing could be done in about 2 hours, really. So don't do more work than necessary for the size of the problem you're looking at. Most important tool. I'm going to hide this thing. I wish I could do that. Okay. So this is the influence diagram I put together. So I'm going to say we've got cash flow and value measures. We could add, these are the decisions we had from this prior slide, right? These decisions here, I think maybe I've been added some more. Number of new beds. Okay, I made that a separate decision. And these are the uncertainties shown here. So the number of beds I need is the number of patients, and you could stratify that into what type of patients they are. Costs, operating costs, these are the things that go into those things, and you're pointing them. There shouldn't be any circular routes here. All should be pointing in one direction, if you will. But you can obviously have more than one thing going into another. So the influence diagram can be used to explain. One time I had an influence diagram, this is a long time ago, and we had a couple of companies there, and we spent an hour just going through this one diagram, talking about each one of these things and what did they represent. And when we did that, they then understood exactly how we were going to go about doing the analysis. So this is another thing. It really helps the person who's developing the model, because then they know how things are connected. Now, we saw some people said that they're not familiar with Monte Carlo, but they are doing decision analysis. So I suspect what they're doing is they're doing a decision tree approach. And so here I've taken our little example and broken it into, okay, we've got 3 decisions for a new facility. We've got three outcomes for number of beds, the patients and needs, there's uncertainty, employee salary, and the capital costs. And just this thing is an exponential as you add more uncertainties, right? This is oftentimes a good way pictorially to explain what you've done in a Monte Carlo. But trying to solve a decision tree with all the variables that are necessary can be very daunting. And oftentimes what happens is you end up generating a tornado diagram that says, okay, I can only put in 6 uncertainties and 2 decisions or something like that. I can't handle more than 10,000, 20,000 endpoints. At Chevrolet, I conducted a training class, 5-day modeling class, and each class had their own tree that they developed for the problem we were evaluating. And one class came up on those 100,000 nodes. And so we actually solved it. We solved it. We took a lunch break, believe it or not. It took a while to solve it. It had 100,000 nodes. But using Monte Carlo, things go much, much faster. And today's computers are faster as well. But still, trees are very confining. You're very limiting on what you can put in there. And oftentimes the subject matter experts say, hey, this is important to me. I need to make sure it's incorporated into the analysis. And you can point to the tornado diagram. And there's 2 types of tornado diagrams as well. But and say, well, you see, it's not really important relative to all these other things. And he kind of gets discouraged. But you want everybody on the team to be in alignment with the analysis. And by including them in the Monte Carlo, you can do that. Value measures are very important. So we need to ask, what are your value measures? Do they change with the decisions? We had kind of like, you might have different decisions for exploration versus a capital project or operating costs. And then how do they impact your decision? And what are the trade-offs? In the oil industry, we always had to trade off the net present value or profitability index with the reserves. And that was always a difficult one. And these trade-offs, academically, they would say, well, we'll just put a utility curve or something like that in there. But in practice, they don't work. It's definitely very difficult to go to the decision makers and say, how do you trade off these 2 value measures? They don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at them graphically in our Excel model we're going to do. And that helps them make a decision of how they want to proceed. So here are some different value measures, rate of return and IRR. Very, 4 actually decision value measures. Oftentimes they'll feed into the NPV by saying, I want to have an NPV 15 or 17 or something like that. The profitability index, I think, is the better way to go. But it utilizes the capital. Risk reduction may be another value measure that you're interested in. Safety is always important. And in the healthcare industry, you're talking about, the quality of healthcare that I can provide, and maybe even how quickly I can provide the services. I guess that'd be the deliverability, quality of care, public perception. So another tool you can use, if there's only a couple of things, is to talk about the forces for or forces against a particular decision. And here I talked about new facilities and against new facilities. And you're probably within this framing exercise that you have with different subject matter experts, you're going to have people on both sides of this decision, and they'll come up with a laundry list of these things. And that allows you to have this dialogue, because decision analysis is really about the dialogue amongst the subject matter experts, the project team, and the decision makers. It's not simply an analytical exercise, which a lot of people think it is. So now I want to talk about interpreting a cumulative distribution graph. What I find very strange is that some consultants say, I never use this cumulative distribution graph because people don't understand what it is. They always use these probability distribution graphs, which you've probably seen this, the normal curve, let's say. Okay, it's very symmetrical, and the mean and the mode and everything is right here at the P50. And it's got some nice statistical properties that make it convenient to use, but oftentimes it's not really the distribution that you should be using. Okay. But what I want to demonstrate here was these two things are identical. They're really identical. As we're saying here, right there at the P50, here's the P50, and it comes right here at this top, and it's got the same range, okay? And the advantages of the cumulative distribution graph, and we'll see it when we get into the Excel, is I can overlay these CDFs. Trying to overlay these distributions, probability distributions, very difficult, and even difficult to read. Where if you utilize this, and to me, I think I can explain this in 15 minutes to any executive. And once they understand it and they see some examples of it, they say they get it. And then your analysis becomes much simpler to explain. They tell the story, right? Tell the story. So at Chevron, in fact, I was talking to a gentleman yesterday. I had a meeting. We talked about the format of computer models. And we had kind of like a somewhat standard format at Chevron in developing these economic models. We had like a 30-page modeling guide. And that allowed people to be an analyst in a project and move on. Then another analyst came in and took over the model, and they could easily get into it and understand it, get around in it. So we got people still being admitted here. And so these would be the decision policies or the value measures here. These are some of the variables that are optimized. And then then you can have a dashboard which is kind of a place to start or show to management. You may have a bunch of graphs and then summary economics. And it's just an easy way to lay out the model. And then if I needed to find out MPV, I could obviously go to MPV here and trace where it, come on, mouse, where'd you go, mouse? Well, there's the mouse. Trace where that's being calculated. Okay, and then there's a variable that we use at Chevron called value creation, which is really the value, the MPV, over and above the value that I would have received if I invested that amount of money in my target profitability index. And so this, because what happens is all the options that you have, all the ways you can spend your capital don't necessarily come in at all one time. And so you have to make a decision about this project, not really knowing what else is going to come forward in the future. You know, if you're talking about the stock market or something, you know, everything's available to you today. You could do that portfolio analysis. It's much more difficult when you don't know what the future projects will be in their economics. So you need to establish a target. And what I like to think about is that target represents the average investment that we might be making or have made in the past, in the portfolio that we have. Okay? No. Okay. So at this point in time, I want to go to a live model. We have another 10 minutes, so I'm going to spend it up before our break. So I'm going to spend 10 minutes kind of introducing the model here, and then we'll get into the model and we'll do as much as we can. But maybe we should, I'll tell you what, let's see. Mohammed, do we have a bunch of questions here we might address? Hello, did I lose you? Hope not.
Hi.
Hi, okay.
No, I'm right here. Don't worry. I was going to say I have actually emailed the results from the people's contribution to the Menti for you to play with.
But do we have any questions in the chat there, or should you folks have had a chance to review them? I thought.
I don't think we've got any. I don't think we've got any questions in the chat. We've got a few observations.
Okay. Well, what are some of those observations?
They're more general. I'm just thinking
More
people.
general. Okay.
Yeah. More general.
Okay, they've introduced themselves. Okay. All right. They want to get to the live stuff, I guess. Maybe I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so let's flip over. Let's flip over to an Excel model. Okay, here's the example I asked you about. Question you addressed in that second question. We're selling these widgets. They cost $30, and we sell them for $40. And the actual demand is 100,000. And so we order 100,000. The sales are 100,000. The revenue is 400,000. You can see these are just multiplying here. Cost of goods sold is 300. And so we have a profit of 100. Or excuse me, yeah, profit of $1 million. And our target profit's 800. So we did really well. So that looks like a really good answer, but is it the right answer? Remember, it was the average quantity that was ordered. Now in this model, let's see, do I have some hidden? Unhide. How about demand? Here's my demand. And my demand has, okay, no, I don't know, I got rid of all that, I thought, anyway. It's got, I've got a percentiles here. I thought I had some, all right. All right, I guess that's what I got. Oh, wait, oh, I see. Here's my demand. Here's my demand. Forget all this stuff. Here's my demand. And I'm going to hit end down. I've got 1,000 different answers here, and you can see they're all jumbled up, right? So this is the range of this is the range of demand. There we go. And so in my model, I don't always get 100,000. I get something else. So what we want to do is we want to sample from those 1,000 outcomes to get a distribution for this. And we talked about SIPmath. And so here's the SIPmath modeler tools. And SIPmath is an Excel add-in. For those that have done a little bit of Monte Carlo, you'll probably use Crystal Ball or At Risk. And Crystal Ball and At Risk are programs that you actually purchase and install, and then you typically start that program and then load your Excel model. In this particular case, you're going to actually just load up your Excel model, and the SIPmath modeler tools becomes an add-in, just like optimization would be, like Solver or something else. Unlike the Crystal Ball and At Risk, the SIPmath models can be shared, and you don't even have to have SIPmath on your computer, and you can utilize the model by changing the inputs. One of our practices at Chevron was to color the inputs yellow, so you can see this is a yellow, and the 40 is a yellow. This right now is a yellow, but we're going to change that to a distribution, and this will then, this profit is also an input, will stay there, but this will be a random output. All right. Okay, Mohammed, could we take maybe a break 3 minutes or 7 minutes early? Would that work for everybody? And then we'll get into
Brian, that sounds good. Thank you. So we'll have Brian. There is a question in the chat just on how do you determine the size of the demand data? How do you decide it's 1,000?
that was the way I generated it. I mean, it could be anything.
Yeah, I mean, the general thing with Monte Carlo simulation is that when usually there's enough computing power, so so people will generate 10,000 random samples or even more. But there's a kind of judgment call on what you want to do. But you can start small. But once your model is all set up and you're happy, then you can increase the sample size so you can give it more stability. Yeah. Okay, so
but I think you mixed two questions here. One was the demand list. I had 1,000 of those things. That could be any number you want. It doesn't have to be 1,000. It could be any number. And it's really your sample size. In other words, I went out and did this market survey. How many people did I survey? Maybe I surveyed 530. And so that would be my sample size. And then I would form a distribution from that. And what we're going to do later on in the presentation, assuming we're going to have time, and I think we will, I'm going to show you how to take that sample and fit a metalog distribution. And I'll be surprised if anyone here has heard of metalogs. It's a fairly new distribution, but very flexible. And I talked about it with another person earlier this morning.
Great, so, right. Okay, well, look, it's 5 to the hour. So if people have a 5-minute comfort break, and Brian will start exactly on time. So have a quick comfort break, folks, and see you in a short while.
Very good.
Okay, Brian, you can. Please
Perfect.
go.
Okay. So this is our deterministic model, and I suspect the National Health Service has deterministic models. We can easily make them into probabilistic using SIPmath. And Mohammed mentioned, 10,000 trials. Personally, I don't think you ever need to have 10,000 unless you've got some really low probability events. But with SIPmath, what we're going to do is we're going to go to SIPmath. We need to initialize it. And here's where we can specify how many trials, which is pretty common in Monte Carlo. We're just going to do 1,000. We'll say OK. And you'll notice that what happens is it added 2 more worksheets down here, PM table and SIPmath. And we want to resample this distribution. So now that we've initialized, we can come over here to generate input. And this is very similar to a crystal ball at risk. You're generate, and we're going to do a resample. And the data to resample is over in this demand library. So I'm simply going to select, oh, come on, you're going to really do that to me? All right. I have to come down here, hold my shift key. Ah, all right. Come on. What are you trying to do here? Delete that. Click here. Go up to the top here. I could have named this, I guess, but I didn't. Shift. Huh, didn't highlight the way I expected it. Oh, okay. And so now I'm going to be sampling from these 1,000 things by this range. And you can have an external random number, which would have a variable seed here, or you can put in your own. And so this is a random number that was generated by SIPmath, and it's going to use the Hubbard Decision Research uniform distribution. The nice thing about SIPmath is each variable, uncertainty, has its own seed, which makes it accountable. I'm like a finance. So if you did the simulation in one day and came back a month later and redid it, you get the exact same answer. Okay, so we'll just say okay for this. The formula, what it's telling me here is that where I had that 100,000 is not empty. I'm going to say yes. And so now this is a distribution. Now, why did it not give me a spark line? I don't know. And I'm going to uncolor this, no fill, because it's no longer that. And I'm going to make it an output variable. Oh, I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have done it this way. I have my little shortcuts up there, define output variables. And we're going to call it this name. And we're going to put a spark line in there. And it's telling me I have an output name that has invalid character because you can't have colons and spaces in a range name. So I'll say yes. Oh, there's my spark lines. So it's telling me here's my distribution. And now look how easily I can generate a graph. I'll go to SIPmath graph. And I can do both a histogram. We'll put the histograms here. And we'll put the cumulative over here. So now I've got these, and these are just normal Excel graphs. You can come in here and edit these and make them really fancy if you wish. Now, I dislike these histograms. You could have more brackets. But this distribution is really nice to use, the cumulative distribution function, which is what I advocated in the first hour, right? I'm going to get rid of this. It doesn't help me at all. All right? Well, now, hey, this is no longer my 100,000. What happened to it? Well, it's also a distribution. So let's define that as a distribution graph. Make it a cumulative, okay? What is it saying here? Oh, I guess I have to define as an output first, don't I? SIPmath define outputs is profit. And then I can graph that as a cumulative. Now these are different units. We can see that at 100,000 order quantity, that's what we're ordering, right? Actual demand, decision quality. Where's our demand? Order quantity. Oh, this. Oh, why did I make that the order quantity? Ah, what did I do here? Oh, you messed it up. You messed it up. We're going to clear that out. I'm sorry. So we're going to clear that. This is what we want to have sampling. So we'll sample that because this is going to be the actual demand. Just resample. And we're going to resample demand library. Let's see if this will work now. Nope, it's not going to work. That's right. Okay. Yes. And then we'll define that as an output. Yes. And then we can plot that one. And you can see this chart's bad because I got rid of it. So I'm going to delete that one. And now I've got the demand here. Here's my 100,000 demand. My order quantity is 100,000. What have you done here? Actual demand, revenue. What is the work try? What am I doing? Sales. The sales is the minimum of these two things, is it not? Oh, well, no, this is right. 100,000 because this is 134, right? So now you can look at trials. In other words, we had 1,000 different trials here. So we can look at different trials easily enough. That's trial 1. Here's trial 2. So I was looking at this thing and saying, oh, geez, the model's right. Did I do it right? But because this is interactive, and every time I'm hitting the enter key, every time I hit the enter key, it reruns that 1,000 trials. That's how fast this is. Because it's not going outside of Excel to do the simulation. It's using something called a data table. You don't really need to know about the data table, early on. It's helpful to understand what it is. And I can show you what it looks like. Get rid of this again. This is the data table that has our 2 results. And there's 100,000 of these things here. Excuse me, 1,000 of these things. And it's these numbers that are being utilized to generate these graphs. So here we can see our profit gets maximized at 1 million because I never ordered. I ordered 100,000. I can't sell more than 100,000. So I got this vertical line here, and this shows the downside. Right. So let's start a results section. Probability. Why is that coming so big? Oh, come here. Probabilistic results. So we want to know that our profit profit, I'll do it this way. Profit. And I'm going to get this smaller. And then we'll do formatting here. We're going to format the rest of this stuff. I don't know how that got to be so big, to be very honest. All right. So this is going to be the well, I want to know the average of the profit. All right. Equals the average of this profit number. And then there's a little thing up here, SIPmath, get stats. And when I hit that, it's going to turn that into the average of that distribution here of profit. So it's 619. And you'll notice that 619 corresponds to this number here that's shown in the graph. All right. Now, what else might we be interested in? We might be interested in the range of this profit. So we could look at the P10. And what's the P10? Oh, we didn't talk about that too well, did we? Let's come back here. Oh. There we go. So the P10 is this value here, this P10. If I go to the 10 percentile, it's the value here where there's a 10% chance of being less than this number. And the P90 would be this 90th percentile. So there's a 10% chance of being higher than this number. Okay. Actually, I think this is showing you the P10 on this graph right now. All right, we'll go back to the Excel now.
Brian, if you just scroll up on your spreadsheet, I just think people would find it just a valuable for you to just do a quick overview of where you've got distributions and how the distributions are actually now the calculation, then it's not deterministic. So just say a little bit more about where the distributions are, just so people can kind of be on the same page as you, I think.
Perfect. Okay. So remember, this is a variable we defined as sampling from this demand library, from these 1,000 points. We sampled those. And we happen to sample 1,000 of them. So some of those numbers probably got repeated. But if I'd had 10,000 of these, my marketing sample, I would have only sampled 1,000. So it's a sampling of this distribution, these numbers here, that generates this variable. And that variable, when I plot it, is a cumulative distribution function. Close, looks like this. So the P10 of this distribution.
And Brian, the average is not far off 100,000 for the distribution. So that's
no. You were told that the average was 100,000. So that should be expected, right?
Yeah.
But what you weren't given was the range of the outcome, that the demand could be down here at 17,000, or it could be as high as whatever that number is right there. Let's call it 170,000. But the mean was right around in here.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how we got to that. Now, once I've got that distribution and my order quantity of 100, my sales represents, I could have used a min function here, right? I could have used a min function, but I did it with this actual, this being the, I think this is called the actual by this name here, is greater than the order quantity, then we use the order quantity. Otherwise, we're going to use the actual. And so we don't, you know, we can just look at these things once again by looking at the trials. In other words, we see that the actual demand is 73,000, 74,000. We ordered 100. Therefore, we only got to sell 74,000. And then we have the revenue, the cost and the sales price are fixed right now. Now, if we wanted to look at, we wanted to test this a little further, we could go to another trial. Go to trial 3. Now I've got 147, but I can only sell 100. Or I could put in trial 541. There's trial 41. It's 88,000. I have 1,000 different trials here, and I can look at each one that easily, or I could go over to that PM table and look at them as well. But this allows you to basically test your model as you go along. With a crystal baller at risk, what typically happens is you'll spend, you know, an hour or more, maybe even longer, you know, developing the model, and then you say, let me run this to see what it looks like, and you run it, and you get an answer you don't understand. And now you got to figure out which of the things that you did in that last hour actually caused the problem. Where did you do the error? With SIPmath, because it is easily done, you actually saw me undo something, right? Okay.
Brian, we've got a question in the chat. I think people are really interested in the cumulative distribution and how a decision maker might be orientated towards it to help them decide. So you may be coming on to that soon, but I think just to highlight, that's a question that's come up.
Okay. Okay, I was going to demonstrate the maybe putting in some other uncertainties, but let's do something else first. Let's get this percentiles here. So I want to know the P10 outcome of this distribution, whatever that might be. So there's a function in Excel that says percentile exe, and we want to do profit, right? Here's the profit, comma 0.1. And then we're going to get, we'll get there. P90 is equal, I'll do it again. People learn better when they see it twice, of this profit, comma 0.9, right? And now I'm going to convert those two things using this get stats. And it's going to change the, come back here, just change this reference here of D14 into the range name that I want to use. Oops, what did I do?
Brian, you've got a 1 instead of a 0.1 in the formula for the P10.
All right, it's always good to have an extra set of eyes. Always good to have an extra set of eyes. See, my standard answer should be, I did that to make sure that, you know, someone was watching. So we'll take the, let's see, that one looks like it's already been done. And this one hasn't been done, or has it? Oh, it says profit too. So both of these have been done now, right? So the P90 is 100,000. And we can see that by looking at this graph here. The P90 is in fact 100,000. Let's see, can I get that to go on top? Let's go bring to front, okay? Bring that to front. So the P90 is 100,000, and the P10, which would be right through here, is negative 197. Okay. And we might also want to add here my sales price. Is sales price a decision? Sure is. Sure is. So my sales price here is 40. So now this is the active values. How it's so big, I don't understand. Okay. So let's take these values here and we're going to copy these. We'll put them over here. Oh, I know what I wanted. There was supposed to be else I wanted to do. By the way, I use this quick access bar and I put all the little icons that I like to use mostly up here, which you can do easily by just taking, if I take a formula and I want to have a lookup reference, I can just right click this and says add to quick access bar. That's just right. It's just an Excel function. And then that gives me more real estate here to work with, as opposed to having, where is it? No, I won't play with that. As opposed to having the menu bar showing all the time. I wanted to do one more thing. My manager is very interested in the lost sales. So what are the lost sales? Okay. Well, how do we get the lost sales? Well, it's somehow related to the actual demand and my sales, right? So let's see if I did, what if I did am I going to get this right? The maximum of 0 and this minus, I may have this wrong, so we're gonna find out. My lost sales is 113. That's not right, so it must be the min. It's not right here. Come on, Pat. Lost sales is equal to, we'll build it up from the beginning. Lost sales is equal to this minus this, right? So we lost 113,000. I don't want that to be negative, right? So it's equal to the max of 0 and that number there. Once again, every time I hit the enter key here, it's running that 1,000 trials. And now we can define that as an output because it's a random variable. And we can tell that by going to those trials again. Define as outputs, lost sales, and actually this lost sales should be up higher, shouldn't it? Profit. Let's take these things and we're just going to move them. Control X. There we go. And then we're going to have my average lost sales. Oh, no, we'll get back there. Equals average. Oh, come on, bud. Of lost sales. And we'll SIPmath. We'll get stats. So I lost about 10,000 sales, and we'll try to do this as far as formatting here. All right, and we want to see this distribution. We're coming back to the cumulative, by the way. Okay, lost sales. We're getting So we're going to make that a graph. Now, this is our demand, and this is the lost sales. I want to combine those two. So what I'm going to do is I'm just actually going to copy that, Control C, come down here and select this graph and do a Control V. And now I have my graph showing both those S curves together. If I had different alternatives, okay, I could put, let's say I had, we're going to do this, I was going to do it this way. Remember we copied, no, we didn't, we actually copied that. We'll copy this and put it over here as values. We're going to paste values here. Oh, gosh. All right. Well, I don't like that P10 as an output, as a manager. So what could we do? Well, we could increase the sales price to, let's say, 42. What if I increased it to 42? How would that impact my answers? Well, now you can see that my distribution went from a P10 of a negative 197 to a negative 57. Well, that's better, right? So we can copy that over. Well, what if I went to 45? Getting better here. I'm probably never going to get rid of those negatives. I'll paste that as values. Come here. Admit. Where am I? Escape. Copy those values. Right? Hey, now I've got a positive P10. And do we see that in our profit margin? Now you see this P10 down here is below. The P10 is now positive. It's right over here. It's slightly positive. Now I could also store these distributions, and I could plot these separately, okay? I can do that better with the multiple experiments. I think what I'd like to do, I mean, you could also take this and you could do several of these manually and then plot the profit. In fact, what we could do here, we can plot, let's plot this. We'll plot this as, we'll insert a graph. Here we're going to do a graph like this. And then that other people do graphs all different. Select the data, this data here, and then I need the X values. Oh, shoot. Sales price. I'm going to make a guess here. Because I can't see it very well. F to I here. No, E to G. Come on. This thing's in the way. I'm going to say okay and see what happens. Or cancel. Let's cancel that. Let me move this out of the way. Come on, admit. Keep admitting people. Select design. This one moves, you see. Edit. X values are these sales values, right? And say okay. Okay. Now that was the means. That's this thing going up here. But also I wanted to show on this particular chart. I can show I can add the P10 outcome. The P10 outcome is going to be these three values and tab, and the P10's over here. Okay. Now I add one more. It's going to be the P90. Wrong, but wrong. Why is it want? Tab. P90 is here. All right. And now if we had more uncertainties here, this would be a more interesting chart. And we could labels. I don't want to do a lot of graphing stuff here. You probably know how to do that. So now, does that help on the demand side on that S-curve question, or is there a follow-up question to that?
No, that's great. So generally speaking, you can compare your different strategies using a cumulative distribution plot or an S-curve, and depending on how the axes are, either want to be further to the right or further to the left, depending on whether you're maximizing or minimizing something. But the opportunity to compare different strategies using cumulative distribution plots means that decision makers have to be orientated to how to read one of these. But once those are there, then the uncertainties are made absolutely explicit to them. And I think that's probably the key point. Sorry, Brian, do carry on. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to augment that, is to say that, you know, even looking at these lost sales, 50% of the times I don't lose any demand. I sell everything I can. Okay. And these are the lost sales. But sometimes I get up as high as losing 70,000. I guess 70,000, 74,000. So I mean, this becomes a you know, a value measure trade-off. You know, if I'm willing to lose these kinds of sales, and there may be some reputation here too, as far as that needs to be considered. So you're as a decision analyst doing decision quality with your team, you're not trying to give them the actual answer. You're trying to present to them different alternatives. And what I'd want to do here would be to present the S-curves of these three things, and maybe some others. Although you can get these things too complex. You want to keep the story simple as possible. What do they really need? What's important to making the decision? Okay. So now let's go over. I need to open up my email here. Let me stop my sharing for a moment here. Over to my email. And Rachel sent me the list of inputs that you folks sent on your estimates of what should be. Okay, Rachel, when you would have set this around?
Just while Brian is doing that, just to kind of, it's one of the things about Sam Savage is has written a very entertaining book called The Floor of Averages.
Right.
And that really just makes the point that when we plan on a single value, usually the average, then on average our plans are wrong. And the summary of it is that instead of decision makers being given a single number, they should be given distribution. They should be given a distribution, and the mathematics of distributions is made more straightforward with modern computing, whereas the analytical solutions are much more challenging. So just summarizing decisions through distributions as opposed to through single values. Sorry, Brian, I was just doing a filler while you were doing your data.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it, Rachel. I'm not seeing.
Okay.
The file.
I've also put it in the chat. I've sent it to you, so you might be able to pick it up from that.
Okay, let me go over to chat here.
You can't see the chat.
Oh yeah, I can see it.
So I've put them in there. Those were the values. Can you see
I
them?
got it.
So that might
Control
work.
copy. Let me see if I can do that. That'd be
Yeah.
fine.
Hopefully it'll treat them as numbers. So one or two people put a text in. Of course, that was me not forcing people to put a number in, and that was absolutely fine.
Okay.
So
let me come back here to my Zoom and share again. Share my screen. Okay.
Okay.
So these are the answers that we got, right? And so we can see we have oh my goodness, we have a range from looks like 20 to 90,000. What does this distribution look like? Okay, so we can do this a couple of ways, but I want to show you something that's really, really important. I'm not sure why I'm getting this. There's probably a graph here that needs to be deleted. But there's something that Tom Keelan developed called metalogs. And you don't need to understand the background of all this, the math of it. You just need to know, hey, that works, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new file. And I'm going to open up this thing called equally likely data metalogs with a button in it. Okay, so I'm going to open up this file. And you should see this equally likely data. There's lots of little graphs here and one great big graph here. We're looking good?
Yep.
Okay. So what this thing does is it actually fits data. And so you put your data over here. I'm going to delete all the data that's there now. Okay. And I'm going to come over to our model. I'm going to put in your data. Okay. Copy over into this thing. We'll paste it right in here. And it's showing me your data. And it has the option, it's saying upper bound. Okay, well, first of all, let's make this you have a choice here of making this either unbounded, a lower bound, an upper bound, or bounded on both front, top, and bottom. Let's start off with an unbounded distribution. And it says, and then you can specify the number of terms. And it says I can do 2, 3, 4, and 5. So why don't we start off with a 3-term metalog and see what it looks like. Okay, so there's a 3-term metalog. And one thing we might want to do is you would never order a negative quantity, right? So we really want to limit the downside. So we'll do an SL here. And for the lower bound, we'll put in a how about 10,000? Is it like that? Lower bound must be strictly less than all input values. Oh my goodness, what's the lowest value we have? 1,000? There we go. All right, there's 1,000 is a lower bound. Well, that doesn't look too hot, does it? Let's try 4. Ooh. Now we need an upper bound. Well, let's try putting an upper bound as well. So we'll do an upper and a lower bound. We're bounded on both ends. The upper bound we can make is 150. It's 150,000. Okay. I guess we had somebody who had 150. Let's see if there's 160,000. So that looks like might be a reasonable distribution. If I wanted to make, we've got a lot of people that put in 100,000, and that was their bias. I mean, that's what Mohammed was talking about. If you just did the average, that's 100,000. Most of the time, you're going to be wrong. Okay. And we saw that when we developed the model. So now the question is, how do I get that distribution into my Excel model? Well, what we can do is we come down here. Let's not worry about this. That doesn't make any sense at all. But certainly this looks like it fits my data. I can make a metalog distribution. So I'm going to make a metalog distribution. And what it's done is converted it's actually generated this distribution. You don't need to know that understand the mathematics all of it. All you need to know is that, hey, it worked. This is what it gives me.
Well, that's pretty amazing, Brian. Sorry if I can say.
You know? And so now we can copy these three things here. Copy those. And we're going to come over to our SIPmath model. And I got rid of this thing again. Hide the floating chart. Okay. Over to my model. And we'll come up. Let's put it down here, and then we're going to move it. Okay. I'm going to paste it right in here. Control V. And then this is a uniform distribution. I need a uniform distribution there. So, you know, I'm gonna do it this way. I'm going to generate a distribution, define an output, generate a uniform distribution, and I want it to use a particular seed. Let's say I want to use a seed of 101. And I could do this for any one of my distributions in SIPmath. And I'll put my seed, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to do it that way. I want to point to this variable right here. Okay. Now that's one iteration using a seed of 0. If I put a seed of 1, you see I get a different answer. And why are these things so big? Okay, close. This is better. All right. So I can put in 1,334. You know, that's another seed, right? I get a different answer. They're all uniform distributions. Uniform distribution means it goes from 0 to 1. And if I was to plot that, it would be on a PDF chart would be a flat line. On a cumulative, it would be a straight line between 0 and 1. Okay. So this number wants to be the uniform distribution. So I'm just going to say equals to this. So now it tells me the P74 by distribution is 117,000. Okay. Why don't we define this as an output? We'll call this metalog. Metalog, oops. Metalog demand, okay? And I can plot that. All right. And if I wanted to, I could come over here and I could take this chart, copy this one, and come back over to my model, and paste it in here as a graph, a picture, okay? And I don't know if is it fair to say that those two are the same thing?
Yep.
With a different scale. Yep. So at this point, I mean, you can look at them. At this point now, well, what do I do with my, what do I have? What is my middle? Oh, there's my middle. And really the only thing I need is, oops, it's got it on the wrong row. So I'm going to move that up a bit. Control X. I think it's on the wrong row, is it? Maybe not. Oh, I know what the problem is. Cancel. Oh, what's this? Oh, dismiss. That's fine. No problem. Okay, they're on the right row. I can substitute this variable for my sampling. So let's say that you have all this historical data in the hospital that you've collected that's relevant to the problem that you're trying to evaluate. I can use that historical data, and I think this metalog thing will go 100,000 variables inputs. You could put those 100,000 inputs in that thing and generate this distribution, and you can summarize that with this one equation. And now you've simplified this, the size of this model to something more manageable to work with. And you by showing, you know, management these kinds of graphs, you can say, look, I've captured the essence of that distribution. That's why metalogs are so important.
And Brian, how do you add the metalog to the actual model now?
Oh, well, I mean, it's in here now. This came out of the model.
Oh, I mean,
so,
in the demand cell.
That's what this is. This is the demand.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is, excuse me, this, okay, this is the demand. I guess this is demand. This is actually, this is not demand. This is wrong. This is not really demand. This is really the, this is the order quantity, is it not? This is the participant.
Yeah, this is what subject matter expert values or something. Yes.
Participants' order quantities.
Yeah.
Okay. It's important to get the right units. That's right. Thank you for that, for pointing that out. And so on average, you said 85. Interesting, interesting. If you had, I mean, you could easily, I mean, order quantity is really a decision. So I don't really want to put in a random number for that. But if I had the demand, I could do the same thing for demand. I could take the demand function that I have. If you want to see that, darn it, this thing keeps moving, keeps coming back, and I wish I could get rid of it forever. Here's the demand library. I could take this whole demand, right? Shift, I copy that. I can come over here to my metalog and paste it in.
Well,
okay. And now, upward lower bound, let's make, once again, we'll come back here and make this unbounded. And I think you can see there's a blue line on top, right underneath the yellow line.
yes.
That makes, yeah, okay. Is that close enough? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
what do you want me to do with that? And so then what I could do is I could, once again, do a make. Now, what I want you to watch is, see this equation down here? I'm going to make this metalog, see if that thing changes. It changed, right? Yeah, there it is. So this is the distribution that matches that S curve right there. And the S curve, let me just regenerate that curve like that.
So Brian, can I just, so in practice, the data mountain is growing all the time. So it's not unusual for routinely collected data to be in the millions, really. Just say a little bit more now about how you see metalogs being useful to us in practice.
Well, you talked about millions. In other words, you've got millions of data, right?
Yes.
Like I could have 10 years of bed requirements on a daily basis. And the question is, on an average day, and maybe I stratify that into different periods of the year. You know, maybe the holidays have more accidents and more needs than other times of the year, or summer or something of that nature. You know, you could stratify that data and have different distributions, right? And you could, if you had still way too many, let's say you still had 1 million things, I could then sample from that stratified data. And if you wanted to do 10,000 samples from that, that would give you a reasonable assessment of that. You could then fit that 10,000 to a metalog easily enough, just like I've done here. I work with the Boy Scouts, and to show you how easy this is, this Boy Scout wanted to use it for doing the scoring in a camporee. And so I taught him how to use metalogs, and they did metalogs for about 4 hours, 5 hours, scoring everything at the camporee. But they did it using this program here.
So Brian, in the strength of the metalog seems to me like if we have empirical data where we don't really know what the distribution is, we don't have to go through a curve fitting exercise through the traditional route of trying to work out what distribution best fits the data. The metalog will just do it for you, and it will produce a relatively succinct equation which summarizes really quite complex amounts of data. So instead of carrying the 1 million data points with you, you just carry that small equation with you, and that represents the entire. So the question in the chat was about curve distribution fitting. This is empirical, and so it doesn't really require you to have an underlying theoretical distribution before you start.
That's correct. That's correct. Sorry, I'm so slow here, but this thing keeps getting in my way. So let's see. I think I brought this in here. I'll just do a paste. And this graph is in the wrong place. And we're going to see now that I've got this. Remember, this is the seed, right? And this is a random number. Okay, I can take this, copy it down to, I guess here, change this to another number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gives me a different random number. Because I wouldn't want to use the same random number here, right? If I use the same random number, they are perfectly correlated. They're always together. If one was the P48, the other is going to be the P48 of that distribution. So then I'll just set that equal to this. Okay. We'll define that as, oh darn, I got the wrong name up for the other one, but so we'll call this one the output name's metalog distribution 2. Okay. I don't want to use the same number. And I can plot that. And can't cancel. Yeah, I can plot that. Cancel. So what I want to do. Can't plot that. Wrong. See, that's the advantage of the SIPmath. And by graphing it, I can say, hey, that's wrong. I was supposed to make this the distribution, not that. That's a random number. This is the uniform distribution, is it not? Going from 0 to 1 equally likely. It's a straight line. So I messed up again. So we'll come back over here as SIPmath, and we're going to clear that variable. It's now cleared. And now we'll define it over here as the metalog demand 2, okay? Yes. Then we'll plot that one. You can see how easily this is no good. That's no good. We're going to delete that. Okay.
So Brian, we're coming to the last 5 minutes of the session. I'll just make a few highlights and then open up for questions as well. So Brian, if I do fall into a bear trap, do help me out. So I think one of the first things to note is that standard Excel, the development of the data table has really transformed the capability for doing Monte Carlo simulations in the way that Brian's identified. I think the second thing is that the mathematics of distributions, the tools to handle that, SIPmath provides that through its kind of functionality and the buttons that are available. The the ability to have a seed to control the random numbers, that provides a very powerful audit tool to ensure that your results are replicable. So I think it's kind of brought Excel into a very different level when it comes to thinking about Monte Carlo simulation. These things can be done in other software as well. I'm particularly interested in open source tools like R and Python and so on, and random number seeds and so on are standard in that context. Whereas for Excel, I think this is really quite a big kind of quite a fundamental change, really, to allow a Monte Carlo simulation to be done with an audit trail and the kind of calculation support from SIPmath. Brian, say a little bit about SIPmath. How is it available? Is it free? Is it costing? And kind of, I know a little bit about the history, but not everybody will.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's say what I'm using here, what we've done here, you could do with the free version. And actually, I think I have a slide here. I guess I'll share again. Share my screen. We're going to come back over here to the PowerPoint again. We'll come kind of down here and so you can visit this probabilitymanagement.org, and on there there's tools, and you can download the free version of SIPmath, and you can do all the stuff that I did here with that version. However, there's also a chance calc version, and there used to be an enterprise version. And actually, in the last couple of days, Mohammed, I've been in touch with Sam Savage about that, and off said, "Hey, can you give these guys a discount?" And eventually, after going back and forth with Sam a few times, he says, they're a nonprofit. I can negotiate and give them a lower price. So I'm going to suggest, Mohammed, you need to talk to him, because I'd really like to see you get the enterprise version or the chance calc version for a few copies. And remember, you don't have to have SIPmath you only need SIPmath to develop the model. You don't need SIPmath to run the model and change the inputs. And so the model that we put together today, I'll clean up a little bit, and then I'm going to send it to you, Mohammed, and you can distribute to all the participants, and they can play with it without doing anything extra on their computers, okay? Anything extra on their computers. And if you want to learn more, you can always go to my YouTube channel. I do have, there's valuable information, and clearly in the medical industry, you've got pilots and tests that you're running. How confident is a COVID test? In other words, you get type 1 and type 2 errors. You can do that sort of thing with simulation, and my YouTube channel talks about how to do that. We've already talked about the meta log distribution. And so I think, as you say, I think SIPmath really simplifies this thing rather than some of the other software that's out there trying to use R or Python to do this stuff. I was talking to a guy yesterday about that. And then you mentioned the flaw of averages. Here's the flaw of averages. Another couple of other books you might want to think about is You Can't Just Give Me the Number by Pat Leach. And Decision Quality by Carl Spetzler. I don't know if he's the current CEO. I think he may be the CEO. No, I think he's chairman of the board of SDG now. He was CEO, and I think he's given that role up. And then we talked about, there was one person that says, I have non-quantifiable variables. Well, here's a book called How to Measure Anything. And so you might want to look at that one too. And then How to Decide, I mentioned Annie Duke in her book. And none of these are statistical books. I think How to Measure Anything is a little bit more statistical, but these are all reasonably easy reads, and with stories in them and how things were used. So I would really try to do that. And we had final questions, then we had a final questionnaire that we're going to do, Rachel. You want to put that in the chat now?
Yeah.
Yes, it's the same link as before.
Okay.
I'll just pop it in because it's.
Okay, just while people are doing that, so just to point out that obviously doing decision modeling like this is a skill, and and today was really a taster session for you to kind of get a sense from kind of Brian's experience and expertise and so on. And the opportunity to practice, I think, is a very important thing. And we are thinking about how we set up some introductory courses on actually supporting people into kind of learning how to embed this skill in practice. And today was kind of a bit of an overview of kind of how to do it and to be able to do it in Excel. So don't be too hard on yourself if you don't feel you can kind of straight away do the skill. If you walk away just with the notion of, instead of a number, I need a distribution, and then the mathematics of distributions needs to follow. That's a big step forward, actually.
Yeah, well, that's oftentimes the stumbling block. It says, I don't know what distribution to use for this. Well, I don't need to know that. All I'm going to do is use the metalog because it's going to fit it for me.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. I'll hand back to you, if I may, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's great. I would just like to, you've already thanked Brian for his time, but I would like to thank you again. Brian, thanks for coming.
Are you going to share that last questionnaire?
I will do it. Well, I was going to just summarize it. I was going to say everybody had gone for, they want to learn more, Brian. They want to learn more. So that's where that was the consensus of opinion is that they do in fact want to learn more.
People want to know where they can get the metalog added. Is that again on the probability management website?
Let me send it to you, Mohammed. You can distribute it.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah. That's much appreciated. I should point out that the academic work on it is absolutely excellent, and it is considered to be a game changer. So,
and I would also like to thank everyone for coming, and just to remind you that we have another eLab learning event on Monday, and that's all about demand forecasting for executives and professionals. So I'd strongly recommend you get signed up for that. That's at noon on Monday, and of course you have probably already signed up for the whole conference, which is on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. Face-to-face tickets have long since gone, but there are online tickets available for you if you haven't already signed up. So do sign up for that if you haven't. And I will stop sharing my screen and I'll come back to the room, and we're just 2 minutes over. So I think that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks everyone.
A round of applause, Brian. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thank you for attending. I mean, and sticking in there.
Right. Well, look, I'm sure we'll be in touch, Brian. Have a nice vacation, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you,
so much. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Brian. Bye bye.
Bye.
You're welcome.